Peppy, thank you for that kind introduction. Although I did go to school in Boston, I did my undergraduate and graduate work there, and all the members of a fraternity gave me some advice on a number of different things. One of them was when you're in competition, when you're giving any kind of speech, and their advice was, in essence, the 5 Bs, and the 5 Bs meant be brief, brother, be brief. So in conclusion, I want to thank you again. So you're laughing because you heard speeches and you know they never heard of the 5 Bs. But I feel that even more so when I'm here and I'm listening to everything that Judy walked you through. And then, of course, there's the dance crew here. I mean, how are you supposed to compete with that? Although I was waiting for them to do the whip nene because I know how to do the whip nene, and I was going to join them. Of course, they would have given me 1,000 stares. But and Randy, I think Randy has left us, but it seems to me that a statue is in her future somewhere. So what an incredible organization, and what incredible accomplishments that you're in the midst of, especially in a time where I do wonder whether or not in our time and in our generation we are dealing with the toughest challenges of our time, whether it is the environment or the need for gun control or the need to be more inclusive. In my quiet moments, I do wonder how well we are taking on the challenges as prior generations did, of which we are beneficiaries and actually caretakers. And then I come here and I feel the energy and the vibe and the experiences, and I think, well, we are in good hands. So a lot of what I want to talk to you about tonight is how we have historically seen diversity, why that paradigm needs to shift, and shift really quickly, the intersection of inclusion and the environment, and how particularly important it was to me, because for all of the things that I've heard you describe, there is yet another dimension, actually, in which the environment plays a part that we don't talk about, but profoundly and deeply affected me then and affects me to this day. So I think about kind of all of my journeys, my experiences, kind of where I've been, and I have had an opportunity to travel the world, many nations, been to our White House several times. I've testified before the U.S. Congress, and so when you go through all those experiences, you really do get a sense for what's unfolding around you. Just this kind of different dynamic, how much the world is changing, and how we, as a result, need to change. And yet, I can also sense a great deal of frustration. I feel it, and perhaps some of you do too. We're asking some fundamental questions about how to be more inclusive, and we have to overcome some traditional, I think, challenges that we face. So we'll talk about some of that as well. So the first thing I want to do is say thank you, because I have traveled a fair amount. But rarely do I see such a purposeful, deliberate effort to be inclusive, not with what you say, but with what you do, which is always the trigger for me, because we live in a time of a great deal of expression and a lot of words, but ultimately it's how you behave, to the point of one of Judy's slides. It's how you behave, and more specifically, what you're willing to change. It really tells you whether or not we're willing to be more inclusive. And so when I see everything that you're doing, usually we say thank you for the end, but I'm going to actually share that with you at the beginning. Because much of what we need and much of what EE needs to be more inclusive, you already have. And we're going to talk a bit more about that. So I was traveling back from London a couple of months ago, and I was thinking, because when you fly that long, there's really not a lot else to do but think. There's only so many movies you can watch. Especially when it's stuck on Shawshank Redemption. So if you want any script parts, let me know, and I can tell you exactly what was unfolding. So but as I was flying back, and actually one of the things that we were doing, so Walgreens has now merged with Boots Alliance of Europe. So now that it's known as Walgreens Boots Alliance, and I was in London to talk about our corporate social responsibility efforts in combining the best of Europe and the best of America under the Walgreens Boots Alliance umbrella of health and wellness. So looking at a lot of our efforts around sustainable communities and renewable energy, and looking at the same thing from Boots. And as I was coming back, this was my epiphany. And it's a profound one. Guys, there's a bit of a delay here, so there we go. That was my epiphany right there. That was it. That was it. And so I thought that wasn't really profound enough. So, because this is how, anybody else, just me, anybody else feel like this sometimes? You just kind of wonder, like, why is this so hard? Why is it so hard when it seems so, pun not intended, but it seems so natural, but we're still fighting it in some way. Now, some of that, I think, is because of how we've historically approached this. So maybe we sometimes see it as, let's sit in a room, and you've been in those rooms, and you say, okay, let's define what it means to be diverse, and let's define what it means to be inclusive. Other times it's just perhaps a series of words, maybe. It could be just talking largely about people. Perhaps that's it, or maybe it's just this race. And I think it's perhaps some of this, but I don't think it tells the whole story. But I think what's come out of that, in all honesty, is a lot of confusion, a lot of buzzwords. And as I listened to Pepe share some of your words, it was of great interest to me, Pepe, that very few of how diversity and inclusion has traditionally been defined were on the list of what people said back to you. Right? So that tells me that there is a disconnect that has been and will continue to happen unless we reframe and reshape the dialogue. So that, as a result, has created this feeling of confusion, of anxiety, fear of saying or doing the wrong thing, trying to define something that at times seems weighted in so much controversy, so much emotion, so much indifference at times. And if you don't believe me, just listen to either of the debates in the next couple of weeks. And it won't matter which party you're talking about, you will see this kind of confusion, and you'll see us running to traditional language, and we wonder why we're in these kind of furious spin cycles. This was really clear to me some years ago when I saw, in essence, the advertising community was really being roundly criticized for their lack of inclusion. And they also received a similar letter about 20 years prior, and if I had the opportunity to put both of them up on the screen, the only way you'd know the difference is that the one 20 years prior was clearly done on a typewriter. So they were talking about the exact same things. Nothing had really changed. I really saw this when I did testify before Congress. And if you ever have an opportunity, you ever get an invitation to testify before Congress, one, it's not really an invitation. So it comes in this really nice letter, and we would love the honor and the pleasure of your company, which means unless you want an audit in your future, you will be coming to testify. So here's what happened. And this was around a similar issue of inclusion. This was about diversifying census takers. The Democrats had just taken control of the House. The first issue they put on the agenda was diversity of census takers. And they ran to their traditional corners, Democrats and Republicans did. The Democrats said, Republicans, you're being racist. You're saying that you can't find any. That's why you're not inclusive. Republicans were saying, no, we're not. Put them in a very, very kind of defensive position. And then I'm one of 7 people asked to testify. Now, if you testify and you ever watch C-SPAN, here's how it goes. They actually already know what you're going to say before you get on C-SPAN, before you appear before the Senate. So you have to submit a speech, which is what I did. And in my speech, I said nicely, respectfully, you're both out of your mind. And right after my testimony, I was the last one to give it, and they fired their first 7 questions right at me. So I knew that I had struck a chord. And I think when I tell you a bit about how that came to be, you'll understand why they would be so inquiring. I want you to take a look at this for a moment. Look really hard at it. Look at the things that jumped out at you immediately. Now you have to look really, really hard. And can you see the gray blots at the intersection? But you have to look hard, right? It's not natural to you initially to see them. You have to look harder. And in a way, that's kind of where we are with diversity and inclusion. We're going to have to look harder. We're going to have to look harder. And at times, the inverse of that is sometimes you see things that aren't really there. And I'd like you to keep those things in mind as we move forward. So look at some of the nation's headlines here. And if you wonder whether or not we are approaching this the right way, look at some of the headlines. Are we scared of diversity? EEOC recoveries, working organizations, the government spends a lot of time trying to find discrimination and root it out. And yet, despite all of that, the number of claims are actually increasing, and even around important matters like disability, those whose names are goodwill are actually being criticized for their lack of commitment. If I told you this seminal moment in our generation, election night, 2007, and I don't know where you were, but you were cognizant of this event. You were cognizant of its historical impact, and you felt in some way, shape, or form that it signaled that we had turned a corner. And wherever you were that night, if I joined you, whether you're at your parents' home or with your family, and I had come from the future, and I said, this is a great night. This is a great night. But 8 years from now, this is going to be the cover of Time magazine. You would not have believed me if I said that to you on election night. Because we thought and felt that we had turned a corner. And even one of the words that came up, Black Lives Matter, reflects this sentiment. So again, this is yet another signal that we're going to have to start looking at things just a little bit differently than we have. Because I think the net effect of all of this is that we're tired. There's what I call kind of diversity and inclusion fatigue. We're tired of having the same conversations, tired of talking past each other, frustrated that we're having same conversations that we've had generations past. So there is that fatigue, and oftentimes it just manifests itself in silence. We just don't want to say anything lest we say the wrong thing. But we're going to change that. We're going to start with a new beginning. And I want to share with you some of the ways that we can do that, but most importantly, why this is necessary. This is a map of the United States, 10 years, census, 1990, 2000, 2010, 2020. And whether you were born in 1990 or not, or entered the workforce in 1990, graduated college, and if you look at the legend here, the legend simply uses the color to represent how much America has changed and shifted. So the light blue is less than 10%, dark blue 11 to 20%, yellow 21 to 30%, red 31 to 60%, purple 65% and over. So this is a demographic destiny that it is immutable, and it is not changing. And there is nothing that any of us in this room can do about it, nor should we want to. And let's look at just what's happening right now as we're speaking. Look at how much the nation is changing. So this idea that we can remain in our kind of own isolated worlds, particularly around movements, whether it's environmental education, whether it's disability, whether it's diversity. This demographic reality is going to force us to find degrees of partnership or mutuality. So these things are having effects. Here's one of them. We're going to live longer, all of us. Aren't you excited to hear that? We're going to live longer. And we're going to live in an America that is much like what I saw when I walked the streets of London. There will be no clear racial or ethnic majority. And we know that because today, if you took the number of all the children born in the United States, over half of them are children of color. Demographic reality, demographic fact, not going anywhere. We're going to have to think of inclusion now, not as something that's nice to do, which is kind of where we've been. It's kind of corrective action thing. Nice thing to do, right thing to do, important. And you get the diversity, I call it diversity head bob. Everybody goes, yep, that matters. That matters. It's important. But if we are to take on the challenges of our time, we're going to have to think about this as necessary to everything that we do. not something that we'll get to just a little bit later. Or we're going to find ourselves relegated, globally in particular, as an afterthought. And we and our children and our grandchildren and great-grandchildren, they will read about what we failed to do. And they'll say America lost its place in the world largely because it refused to get out of its isolated ideologies. That's what awaits us. But there's still plenty of time to change that. And these are going to be the frontiers. This is fundamentally now an issue of access in critical areas like healthcare, education, and one near and dear to your heart, sustainable communities. But there's also the intersection of all of those things that are going to matter to us. We're going to have to reintroduce our industry. All of us will, whether it's mine in corporate America or as in the literary world as an author, as a movement, as an organization. We're going to have to reintroduce our industry to millennials who are wielding disruptive technology. If you don't believe me, just ask them. Wielding technology in very disruptive form and fashion. So that means they're going to change the way that we interact if they've not done so already. They're going to change the world of work, and we're going to be bystanders. But that all represents an opportunity, again, for us to be more inclusive because of the innovative mindset that drives, that we all say that we want. And lastly, and what I want to spend a great deal of time talking about, is the importance of mutuality and not remaining isolated in movements. You put it all together, it seems difficult. But some of the world's greatest thinkers, some still with us, some have long since passed. But even Grace Lee Boggs talked about, although she didn't use those words directly, about what happens when you are solely concerned just about, impolite term perhaps, sociologists use, but when you're just concerned about your tribe, your gender, your race, your religion, your movement, your culture. Just you. And if that's all you're concerned about, then isolation happens. You find yourself on the periphery. But, and this is why we should all be hopeful, we've done this before. We've actually seen this before. This is not new. Different form, but it happened before. And we responded very, very differently than we are now. So if you were around 58 years ago and you picked up the New York Times, this is the headline that would have greeted you the first week of October. And look at how alarming that is. I mean, the font's so big, I don't need to read it to you, but look at the language. Fires Earth satellite into space, circling the globe. I've never even seen or heard of anything that moves at 18,000 miles an hour. It's tracked in 4 crossings over the United States and then a bunch of, kind of sub-headlines. This event galvanizes America because we felt immediately a threat because we said, wow, if the Soviets can send something into space at 18,000 miles an hour and communicate back with it, then what could they send over here and eliminate us? Now here's the intersection of how you see things and what you think you see, the gray blots. What we think we have is an intelligence problem. This is what we thought. The Russians were smarter than us. Wasn't true. They were smarter than us about access. So in the same way that we are talking about access to healthcare and education and sustainable communities, this was the challenge that America faced. And just look at what they did. Whether it's President Eisenhower creating the position of Presidential Science Advisor, the House and Senate reorganizing their structures, NASA's created, National Science Foundation is created, National Defense Education Act, and the Perkins Loan. All of this happens, by the way, all of this happens within 1 calendar year. Imagine that today. Can you imagine all of this? Imagine one of these things getting done in 1 single calendar year today, right? Amazing. Amazing how quickly they moved. How quickly they moved because the threat was clear and self-evident. The challenge that we have as environmentalists is we're constantly having, we don't have that Sputnik moment We believe that we do because the research clearly tells us, but we're living in a different time now where we have truly descended into our own kind of ideologies. But there was no denying that headline. So you could debate it if you wanted to, but it was really clear that we had to act. And so we did. But so here are some of the things, some of the lessons, right, that came out of Sputnik. We understood first what's going to happen if we fail. We also understood that we had to solve the right problem, that it wasn't about an intelligence issue, it was about an access issue, and then we had to fund it. We were very clear on the why, the what, and the how. If there's one thing that the diversity and inclusion movement has often gotten wrong, is it's failed to talk about why it matters. We often understand what, and we will respond and say, oh yeah, that makes sense. I heard Judy say, yep, this is what we need to do, and she'll get the head bob. But why is where discretionary effort comes from. That's when you really start to invest your time, when you move from hoping to believing. And in my world, and in my life, and in my personal experience, there's a world of difference between those two things. Hope is powerful, necessary, important. It's all those things. It also asks you to stand there and wait for something to happen. Belief sits on a higher plane, because when you believe in what you're doing, the effect it's going to have, then you will do that which is most required, and you will act, which is exactly and precisely what they did. There were clear lines of collective ownership. Congress knew what it had to do. The educational system knew what it had to do. So it was clear that this was a collective effort, that it had to be. It was urgent. We never knew what was coming next. That's why things happened within that single calendar year. Two things I didn't put up there. The American school day was lengthened as a result of Sputnik within a calendar year. And any of you who received financial aid to go to college, I'll put both my hands up because I received a lot of financial aid to go to college. I owed it, actually, believe it or not, to Sputnik, because that's how our U.S. Congress drove the funding accordingly. We knew what success looked like, what our goal was. We wanted to have a man on the moon, and most importantly, we knew how important it was for us to partner together to speed up the change. And here's what I mean by mutuality. And here's where we get off the rails, one of nature's gifts to us. One thing we know about an iceberg, beyond the fact that it's cold, is that what's below the waterline is much deeper than what's above. And we are a lot like this as people, but if you look above that waterline, this is where we get inclusion wrong. We're always looking at what's above. Those characteristics and things that you see when you first see someone, that we are conditioned to see. Doesn't make us bad people, by the way. So if you notice someone, either the way they're dressed, any of these things above, does not make you racist, discriminatory, sexist, doesn't make you any of those things. Because every day, that is what we are conditioned to see. But that is such a limiting worldview. And if you start to look below the waterline, as you're walking around the conference and heeding Judy's request to get to know someone, I would encourage you to have conversations not up here, not even to judge what's above the waterline, but what's below. Infinitely more interesting. You will learn so much more, including the enormous commonality that you have. Pepe said, and I've said this repeatedly, and I think it's true, none of us look like our story. And that's important because it means you have one. Whatever that story is, it's not evident just by looking at you, but we rush to these judgments all the time. So being above the waterline here will not arm us with what is required for us to take on the next challenges that are in front of us. So here's a mutuality of movement that we have between environmental education and diversity and inclusion. And since we're all family here, I can tell you one of the most difficult parts of my job, I'm so glad I can tell you this because you will inherently understand this. Go somewhere, somebody says, what do you do? And I said, I'm the Global Chief Diversity Officer for Walgreens. And they pause. And they go, now, well, what does that mean? So same thing if you say EE. Now, wait a minute. That's what do you do? What do you do? And so I'm going to give you the answer that I have stumbled upon. I said this out of great frustration. I think it's probably more applicable to environmentalists than those who are traditionally consultants. But I can't remember what conference I was really frustrated. Somebody kept asking me, and I said, I just changed the world. That's what I said, and walked away and let them figure it out. But if you look at the successes just between, and I didn't list all of them here, and I don't need to drain the slide, but haven't we? Haven't we changed the world? We clearly have. We clearly have. And that same urgency, and was it tough? It was tough. Was it thankless? It was thankless. Generations before us, both these movements, many of them, sacrificed more than we're being asked to sacrifice. They endured considerably more, and it was much more difficult at times. So if ever you have those moments where sometimes you wonder, well, am I having an effect? Am I making an impact here? I feel like I am fighting something that's uphill. Just know that time, and over time, you will be proven to be right. That's how you know. But there is an opportunity now to find in one another that mutuality, that common bond, and we have it. So I think about the work that I do, think about the work that you do. What's our mutuality? What are the things that we both do as part of our everyday lives? Well, we both hold up a mirror to the world. We both hold up a mirror to the world, and we ask a critical question. Is this who we want to be? And to do that, we are constantly engaged in changing mindsets. And that's tough, and it's grinding. We are always thinking ahead of future generations. And that is one of the privileges of being a servant, is that you don't always see what unfolds in your time. Gandhi said it beautifully. You always have to do the right thing. You may not see its full effect in the span of your time and in your life, but that's why we have this thing called faith. So we do think ahead. I love this line. I think about it all the time. Comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. Because that's what we have to do just about every day. We have to fight those who are very comfortable with ignoring research that is very clear and specific about what we're doing to the environment. And this me-first kind of prosperity-driven culture that doesn't ask us to look around at the effect that we're having on this great inheritance that is the earth. So we have to afflict people who are comfortable, and we have to also comfort one another sometimes, wondering whether or not we're having any kind of effect. We also know when it's time to change, usually before change is forced upon you. And change is happening. Look at, I specifically remember when I was starting to publish my book, I was meeting with a lot of publishers, and I love technology, I love looking forward, and I said, well, what about e-books? And I remember a lot of bookstores, they just kind of laughed at me, and they said, well, books have been around forever. They're not going anywhere. Well, let's just say several of them don't have that opinion anymore, largely because they've gone out of business. Right? There was a time to change, and they ignored it. So now we have this opportunity to change, right? It's not as if it's not announcing itself. It clearly is. And then most importantly, we do what's right, not what's easy. And that's always a great guide. It's the lessons that I live with every single day. Because the things that to do what's right isn't always easy. It can be difficult. But that's the gift of being a servant. So if you think about this fatigue that we've gone through, right? This kind of, I don't know what to do, and I'm tired of having the same conversations, a bit of frustration. But if we find that commonality that we have, we find the mutuality of us as individuals, as communities, as nations, then that gives us probably a deeper, a bigger picture. So that thing that we think exhausts us at first glance, maybe there's a song to be sung. Maybe there's a little bit more here than meets the eye. As I said earlier, none of us look like our story. So what can we do as a practical matter? There is beyond a shadow of a doubt, generation that is already here. And I mean like literally here in this room. But Judy, you and your team are to be commended for how purposefully inclusive you have been. You do have an opportunity to travel a bit, and I rarely see this kind of inclusion. Rarely. So any idea that you have that you need to bring in people from the outside, perhaps you can. But a lot of it you already have. That's true for us as individuals as well. If you understand equality, access, opportunity, you already have what's required to be inclusive. You already possess it. Whether it's forming national local alliances with organizations who have been committed to issues of access. I serve on Secretary of Labor Perez's advisory committee for the integrated employment of people with disabilities. And you should see the long stares I get when I'm in Washington, D.C., and I talk about the importance of the environment to people with disabilities. Because everyone is always staying in their lane, so to speak. And we have got to find that commonality. How can we not have these discussions around this common bond? We are not people who just grow up on an island. We're a lot more than that. As I looked at your strategic goals, and I thought, given the urgency that's in front of us, and this is clearly an urgent time, is there an opportunity to add inclusion as a strategic goal? Push the envelope here. And you can say, well, maybe, maybe not. But it's something that we'll have to think about. And because we have those common mindsets, because we approach things so similarly, better, actually, who better to show the way is to be done than EE? Off the top of my head, none come to mind. The entertainment world, no. Too mired in stereotypes. Politics, no. Too mired in ideology. The pulpit, no. Too mired in prosperity. So where is it to come from? Where's this idea, commonality, to come from? And who's to say that it can't come from us? And who's to say that it can't come from within this room? And most importantly, you have to tell the story. We are a world of storytellers, and it's important to tell the story about why it matters and what we're doing, and to look forward as we always have, and to protect the world that we are in. We have to tell the story. Mine began in this community of New Bedford, Massachusetts, once the whaling capital of the world, before we woke up and realized what we were doing to that species, although kerosene, to be honest, had a lot more to do with it. New Bedford, or New Bedford as you say if you're from there, had also this great history in the abolitionist movement. It was the first place that Frederick Douglass lived when he escaped from the South. And William Lloyd Garrison spent a lot of time that actually had this amazing history that you would think was part of a big city. So New Bedford knows all about freedom and access and equality and the battle for the right to find your place. That's what that city represented. If you've seen the movie Glory, members of the 54th and 55th Regiment came actually from this community. And many years later, this handsome little boy here would find himself in a similar kind of battle. That is me at the tender age of 7 years old. I apparently suffered from the virus that all children raised in the 1970s had, and that was the giant collar virus. The person who laughs the loudest is the one who also has that shirt. I'm really happy to report that I've grown a neck, though. I remember where this picture was taken. I actually didn't see it until 5 years ago. It's the only picture that exists of me as a child. And when it came tumbling out of my case file, it fell to the floor, and I'm like, that's a cute kid. I didn't realize it was me because I'd never seen a picture of what I looked like as a child. Isn't that hard to imagine, this kind of selfie generation? we take pictures every couple of minutes. And for me, for the first time, it was such a shock. But as soon as I saw it, I remembered where I was. In fact, if you look closely, my arms are actually outstretched. I'm holding a swing. And I am at Buttonwood Park, where my social worker has taken me as part of the visits. So I'm smiling because I'm so happy to have a camera pointed at me. But that smile is hiding a lot of things. That by this age, I've been in so many foster homes that I've lost count. That my very physical appearance is a challenge for everybody entrusted with my care. I'm an African-American boy with blue eyes, a blonde afro, and a Polish last name of Klakowicz. So every day I'm asking, now what are you? And what is a Klakowicz? And why do you look like that? And do black people actually have blue eyes? Those were the questions I got every day. And as I got older, they became more profound. Where's your mother? And where's your father? And I always had to answer the same. I don't know. And so what happens is that I get tossed off into a system that completely forgets about me. I'm introduced to diversity when I'm 5 years old. I'm a social worker who, after this very, very long day, I woke up that morning, and while I don't remember many of the foster homes, I do remember this sense of just being moved from place to place to place. And now I'm trying to find home. But this is the day that I think I'm going to find it. So I'm very excited. I get in the social worker's car, and we're going around, we're visiting home after home after home, and it becomes clear to me that this trash bag that carries my belongings is going to go back with me to wherever it is that I am, because I'm not going to find home today. And I asked the social worker, I said, well, why is it so hard to find me a family? And she said something very interesting. She said, it's because we don't know if you belong with a white family or a black family. Now, if you say that to a 5-year-old, for the most part, the only thing that they've experienced in the way of color at that age is a box of crayons. So I thought that she was referring to the color of the house. And this really confused me. Because I thought, well, why does it matter if the house is black or white? If there's a real mommy and daddy in there and you get to eat every day, that'll be home for me. And that would be family. But it never happens. Because of that need to label and define. Those entrusted with my care were so busy trying to figure out what I was. Is he black? Is he white? That they simply forgot who I was, which was just a young boy in search of a home. And so as I think about that very turbulent time, the word that comes to mind more than any other is unnecessary. So while I love the life that I have today, I can tell you the path that I had to take to get there was unnecessary. And I say that largely because there are many embroiled in these same kinds of circumstances who are necessarily on that path, and they shouldn't be. And many of them do not survive. Buttonwood Park, though, becomes my sanctuary. And so while we are engaged as environmentalists in the work of policy and process and organization and discipline, we're also talking about lives and images and perspectives and things that you see. So while I am with this one particular foster family, with whom I live for 13 of my 18 years, where every day is war. Even now, I still don't have the vocabulary, the language to express what it's like to wake up wondering if today's the day you're going to die, and to know that if you do, no one's going to care, because no one will know. So this place, where that picture was first taken, that was my sanctuary. It was a lot more than just a park. It let me know something that I so critically needed at that time, which was that there was goodness in the land. There was green grass there, and flower beds were neat, and there were pretty colors. So in the midst of all this darkness that I was immersed in daily, I still saw beauty. And that was so ever important to me. And this is the park, the way it looks then and the way it looks now. So I imagine that, though I live in Chicago these days, that there are children who are walking through that park much as I did. And sometimes I wonder if they're pulling from it what I did. I think so. Down in the lower right was my favorite place in the park. The park had a zoo as well, but my favorite place was the library. So during the winter months, when I would sneak away into the library, I would go, and I would stay there all day, reading whatever I could get my hands on, so that love of reading becomes like this secret weapon to me. See, you cannot tell me that I am not going to find family. You can't tell me I'm not going to college. You can't tell me that I'm not going to defeat this family. You can't tell me any of that. Because I already had a vision that came to me through Buttonwood Park and came to me through the library. And I had this other hard reality to deal with, and it was just kind of the risks that I had to take. One of the rules of this foster home was that I couldn't be seen reading in their presence. It doesn't make any sense to you when I say that. It didn't make any sense to me then. It doesn't make any sense to me now. So I used to have to sneak and hide, and I suspect that they didn't want me to become more informed and more aware. I was a very quiet boy. I didn't talk very much. You can see I'm making up for it. But I had my favorite spot, and that was it. That spot right there, which I now know. I didn't know it at the time, but it's a retaining wall, and you understand the importance of a retaining wall in environments. But to me, see, God had put it there just for me. See, He had yanked it out of the mountain, and He had stuck it there. And that's where I would sit, and if you look closely, it looks like it was pulled out of a mountain except for that little flat spot. And that's where I would sit. I was a small fella at the time, and I would sit right there. And I would read usually my latest mystery. And that's where I am sitting. When I hear someone coming, the sidewalk at that time in front of that wall is actually not sidewalk at all, but crunchy gravel. So I hear somebody coming. Now, what I really want them to do is to keep walking. Because if an adult stops and talks to me and this foster family sees this, then more hell and more fury is going to descend upon me. So I really am thinking, keep walking. Sometimes we're guilty of doing those things, of walking ourselves past situations. But this adult doesn't do this. In fact, this adult stops right in front of me and says something most magical. This voice says, "What are you reading?" I was so nervous. I just held up the book, and then she asks me a second question. She says, "Well, weren't you reading that last week, and shouldn't you be done by now?" Which amazed me, because I'd never seen this person in my life. So how did she know that I was reading the same book over and over again? And I finally managed to say, well, I just, I finish and I go back to the beginning and I hope I see new things. She says, "I see." The entire time I'm looking at her feet, though. I'm too afraid to look up. And so to this day, I can tell you what was on her feet. A pair of white tennis sneakers with no laces and a ring of blue rubber that went around them. I've lost contact with her over the years, but I still remember those sneakers. And I especially remember them when later on that night there was a knock at the door and somebody says, "Is Steve there?" Now, when you're in the midst of a circumstance like that, you remember every kindness. So I knew who this was. I knew the sound of her voice. And I came running around the corner. I almost run into her, but the reason I don't is because she's holding a box of books, which she brought me not only that night, but many nights, though she was unaware of what was unfolding. That family dwelled in secrecy and deception and manipulation. And I would ascend the stairs to that house and I would wonder what was going to befall me. But I would see those books there. So I knew two things. One, that she had been there. And two, that she saw something in me that almost no one else did. But it was that sanctuary, that rock wall, the shadow of that tree that gave me peace. It gave me this sense that the adversity that I had come into the world with, that I was going to be able to do the one thing that I wanted to do with it, was not to dwell in it and not to lament or languish, but to build from it. So whether it was the park or that wall, that's where I got that sense. And so in the midst of that darkness, and it was dark, there was always possibility. I was always able to see sunlight. And despite this family's many efforts to strip me of everything, they never knew that they were up against this indestructible force that is Mother Nature. So Mother Nature protected me when everyone else around me failed. And it's why it remains and will always be near and dear to my heart. I find myself, my last year in high school, when I finally managed to escape this foster family, with this teacher, and lest you doubt the power, the impact that you have. I'm sitting with my social worker. I have nowhere to go. I've escaped, but I have no plan. Nor does the Department of Social Services. In fact, I still remember sitting across from my social worker, and I watched him for the better part of an afternoon call a series of names on a sheet of paper, trying to find a place where somebody will take me in. But I'm black, I'm male, I'm 16, I have this checkered past, multiple foster home placements, and it's 2 days after Christmas. And finally he turns to me and he says, well, do you know anyone? And I remember thinking, I thought that was your job. But he was trying to help me, so I couldn't say that. I overheard this teacher one time say, as I walked away from a meeting with him and another counselor, he said, I don't have any children, but if I had a son, I'd want him to be just like that young man. And he was referring to me. So when the social worker asked me a couple years later if I knew anyone, I said, well, there was this teacher who I overheard say something really nice about me one time. And that was who I called. And his name is John Sykes. So I am determined to go to college. You can't tell me that I'm not going to. And off to pursue scholarships I go, including that one. That's Daughters of the American Revolution. I applied for that scholarship. At his suggestion. And he said, you're going to get rejected. I said, Mr. Sykes, you're going to reject me. He said, yep, they're going to reject you. And they did. So what we then did is we concocted a plan, and we wrote them back, and we asked them to change their rules. And they wrote us back and said, no, we're not changing our rules for you. So I was told no a lot, that's true, but I was told yes a lot more, which is how I wound up with a full scholarship to Boston College. But while I'm there with him, I'm still trying to fight for this sense of family, where I've come from, and who I belong to. And I found once again nature gave me a sanctuary, which I wrote about it, and I'll read it to you largely because I don't, something like this, I think for me at that time, especially because I was in the moment, best captures this place that I would go to. In fact, that is literally and precisely the place that I would go. A scene that you have seen many times in different parts of your own life, but for me, meant a little bit more. And as I wrote about it, I said I was never freed from endless thoughts about the birth family I'd never known, especially on my frequent solitary bike rides around the area. And during the warm months, I got up at 6 o'clock in the morning. I hopped on the light blue 10-speed bike I'd bought by saving up the weekly allowance that John gave me, and I would ride the several miles down to Horseneck Beach. The sky was often a beautiful light pink and tinged with orange. There was virtually no traffic, and save the humming of my wheels on the pavement, it was totally quiet on Horseneck Road. No matter how often I rode this route, I found myself transported back to an earlier era in rural America. Stone walls, open fields, and quaint farmhouses dotted the landscape, and only the presence of towering telephone lines signaled that modernity had not completely escaped this countryside town of Westport, Massachusetts. A mile into my ride, a large gray-shingled abandoned farmhouse appeared in the middle of a grassy field. And in the middle of its roof was a cavernous hole so large you could drive a car through it. I always stopped to look because I knew that this structure, too, had its story. And then, driven by a voiceless urge and with a single backward glance, I burst into furious sprints of speed my legs churning, my lungs screaming in the cool morning air. A passerby might have mistaken me for an aspiring cyclist prepping for a triathlon rather than what I was, a young boy trying to pedal away years of pain and loss. And at the end of Horseneck Road, right where it turned into East Beach Road, the miles of bucolic farmland suddenly yielded to the powerful sea, a breathtaking picture that only nature could create. Right at the intersection of the two roads was a small inlet. No sunbathers came there. The multitude of rocks made it impossible. I often leaned my bike against a large yellow weather-beaten turn left road sign and strolled down to where the rocks ended and the sea began. Off in the distance, endless water met God-brushed sky. The only interruption, Elizabeth Island, the small island off of Cuttyhunk, known as the final resting place of the Wanderer, the last whaling ship to leave New Bedford. Oftentimes, a wind would howl off the water, creating ferocious gusts of turbulent air that threatened to knock me over. Yet I found if I faced it and dug my heels into the rocky soil, I found I could withstand that wind. And so I stood there, listening to the roaring waves thumping to shore in near perfect cadence, staring at an ocean that appeared as large and mysterious as the past that I was trying to understand. That, too, was my sanctuary. It's where I believed that I would find family, and amazingly, magically, wonderfully, I did. I found family not in the places that we usually find it. You know who this is. I told you that I had lost contact with the woman who brought me books. But some 35 years later, after I had written about her, and she possessing no knowledge of what she had done for me, I met her and her husband. And I asked her, why did you do that? Did you know what was happening? She said, no, I didn't know what was happening. So I asked her again, why did you do that? And she said, I was doing something my mother told me to do. Give from where you are with whatever you have. And all I had to give you was a box of books. But now you and I both know better, that it was a lot more than a box of books that she was giving me. It was vision. You think about how we're immersed in movements and struggles, and sometimes we wonder about the effects we're having. We're not paid a lot, perhaps. And we feel like we're fighting machinery. Think of her in the step that she took, not really knowing, as Gandhi rightly said, not really knowing the effect that you're going to have. She did not know. She is today 82 years old. I've been able to meet her and say thank you. That is her husband, Fred. She now treats me as anyone else, as any grandparent would treat a grandchild. Are you eating enough? But because of her, I found what I was looking for after all. You know who this is. This is Mr. Sykes today, with my children, Quinn and Vaughn and Kennedy. And as you can see, some things have not changed. Well, whether it was Mrs. Levin or the environment or John, that boyhood search that I had, that search for family, find out where I'd come from, what I had inherited, what I wanted to build, ultimately does amazingly and wonderfully come to pass. Didn't come in the form that I thought it would. So I never really found the family that I'd come from. So I did the only thing that you can do, something that you know particularly well. You simply build. You build from where you are with what you have. And sometimes what you have is already within you. It's already here. That is my wonderful wife, Tanya. We've been married for the last 19 years. Our oldest boy, Quinn. Our youngest son, Vaughn. And unequivocally, Daddy's girl, Kennedy. My children think that I am the coolest dad on the block. And they're right. But when I came of age, nobody ever thought that this would be possible. They thought the deficit was too great. Not a chance in the world, they said. Well, they turned out to be wrong. Not because I'm special. I'm not. I simply saw wrong, and I knew I had to right it. And that is still with me. But it's also with you, too. There are things that you see unfolding within our world, in our environment, and you know that you're the one who has to bring it to an end. And so you double down. You assemble the people who are here, and you know that they are enough, and they're sufficient. Lastly, I tell you that I'll never know home in the traditional way. And you ask me where I'm from, most times I have to think about it. I don't know what it's like to have a mother or father. There isn't a community I go back to for the holidays, just not how it shook out for me. But I do find family in different places, strange as it may seem to you. I talked earlier about the commonality that we have, importance of taking stands and looking forward to future generations. That's what family feels like to me. So you having me here to kick off your conference and to be part of your family is truly, truly an honor. And I thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. We have time for some questions. Thank you for such moving and thought-provoking words. There's microphones. We have people with microphones helping us out, so if you have a question, go for it.
What sort of solution would you propose for making our businesses more inclusive? And what are you doing with your job? What's your plan?
Yeah, I would actually suggest starting with what's here. There's a tendency at times with inclusion to talk about what we're not doing, which always puts us in kind of these defensive modes. And so there's oftentimes met with silence. But I think when we start to share our life journeys, our life experiences, so why do we bring the passion for environmental education that we do? And see the common ground that we have. And beginning there, and that becomes actually part of almost like your operating principles that govern a lot of your strategic goals already. I do think it's important to tell the story. Certainly you could see the impact that the environment had on me because nobody came to save me. There wasn't any, I didn't really meet Mrs. Sykes until much later. So, well, who was there, right? It was the park, and the library, and the zoo, that rock wall. But all those interactions, we all have them in different times and spaces in our own life, right? We do. When we start to tell those, find that the strength is within us and not necessarily something that we have to go get, then I think we bring more people into the tent, so to speak, which is what I think we probably need more than anything else. I do think for a lot of communities, whether you're talking about urban communities, rural communities, talking about and aligning with a lot of the servant mentality that a lot of those communities have. It's not just generational, it exists in communities. Now, you oftentimes see adverse behaviors when groups feel marginalized, but for the most part, people love where they live. It's home to them. And when we start to make those intersections and connections, especially around sustainable communities, then people start coming to us rather than making it the other way around. I do think what's different for us, and I know sometimes data can be difficult to unpack, especially when we're kicking off an event, but that drives the narrative perhaps more than any. Most organizations I've been in, it's that one. When you realize this is really a quantitative argument that we're making, in the same way that we make quantitative arguments for global warming. This is no different.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have time for another question.
Just curious, is your position with Walgreens, is there other positions like that around? It seems very unique.
Yes, most Fortune 50 companies have roles like mine. Mine's a little bit different because I have responsibilities for compliance functions and the kinds of businesses that we work with. But another area that I'm responsible for, and you see many companies do this, under my role, they actually create business resource groups that are specifically focused and dedicated to the environment. So a lot of things that Walgreens has done has actually come from our employees who have pushed us on things like electrical vehicle charging stations. It actually helped us design it, and recycling. So when it's an example of the power that's within. So we could have gone out and paid, folks a lot of money. We did have consultants. Even when we created the first zero net energy store in Evanston, Illinois, a number of our pharmacies here in San Diego have solar panels. That's actually all of our team members who are doing all of that work. And they will tell us, no, we need to modify this, create that. But they also see the adoption that we have as well. Businesses have a responsibility accordingly. We all do, right? We can't simply say that we're in this kind of profit-making enterprise. I mean, yes, we have to make money. We have to be sustainable in our own right, but that can't be at the expense of the environment. And here's another power that you wield. The power that you wield as a consumer is enormously powerful. I mean, because the lines of profitability and social consciousness are intersecting. So for a lot of our customers, if we didn't make the commitment to the environment that we did, or employing people with disabilities that we do, they would take their dollars elsewhere. So a lot of times you can coalesce and force businesses that you feel are antithetical at times to the environment and force their hand. And many times, if they don't understand it, they will certainly understand you walking away. And in our world, that is part of our culture, though. Because we're in communities all across America, we see firsthand, because we also employ people in those communities, so we know what matters, and we drive it accordingly. Yeah. Thank you. Great question. I know it's late. Thank you again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Another round of applause. Thank you.